Before there were questions, the answers, and the shifts, it started with a single radical idea. Today, we go back to where the 5 by 5 journey began. And trust us, is not what you expect. So, welcome back to the 5 by 5 Healthspan Initiative Insight series, where we discuss the bold vision of adding 5 healthy years to every life and boosting the economy by 5%, and how you can also contribute in shaping how we think, feel, and act, especially when it comes to aging with purpose and impact.
Hey, it's Mark here, and today's episode is a bit special. We have none less than Stephen Johnston, who is the visionary behind the 5 by 5 initiative, and with us, whose vision is shaping what the 5 by 5 initiative can become around the world and locally within Australia. Trust us, it is a story worth hearing of how we got to this place. So, Stephen, welcome. Stephen, for those of you who don't know, is most recently a co-author of a book on longevity hubs with MIT professor Jane Coughlin. Uh, Basically a creator of multiple venture studios in the space, founder of an organization you may be aware of called Aging 2.0, which now has over 140 chapters, worked in large corporates in the United States and Japan with a particular interest around the longevity economy and how that can basically work at the front line. So Stephen, first of all, thank you so much for starting the initiative, and tell us a little bit about what you feel this operating system of well-being and health is all about.
Thank you, Mark and Maxwell. And just to underline, this is not about me, this is about us. This is a collective of people like yourselves who are excited about this idea of improving health span and improving our economic output, GDP, at the same time. And I think it's worth just sort of winding back the clock a little bit. You mentioned Aging 2.0. I have spent the last 12 or so years looking at age tech, looking at the technology that allows older people to live better. And it's been a journey. And we had, as you mentioned, we opened many chapters. We had this global network, a global conversation of how we can improve the lives of older people with technology, with design. And I probably took away a few lessons from that decade, if you like, of my life, of bootstrapping a global change initiative, which, by the way, is a very bad idea to start a global change initiative. As me and my co-founder Katie Fike, we were excited about this idea, but we didn't really have billions of dollars in funding. And a lot of these things, you generally have billions of dollars of funding, but then you decide to change the world. And so we said, well, let's do it on a vision. So last thing, my wife said, whatever you do, don't do another global change the world on a bootstrap. So here we are. The idea is, in that journey, I realized that we need to get out ahead of aging. We need to do longevity as a framework. And that's why longevity has really started to catch fire and catch the imagination in a way that aging, frankly, still doesn't have a good brand. You know, we sort of joked that we were making aging sexy and making age tech and Aging 2.0. And I think that we did some elements of that, and we brought some tech folks in. But actually what we need to do is get everybody to think about longevity, and not to think about something out there for other people, but think about when you're kids, before you even having babies, all these things really affects the longevity of our lives. And so we need to think about longevity, not aging. We need to think about this collectively. Startups have been, I was living in Silicon Valley, startups are the unit of change there. And in many respects, they are effective, but also systems are the things that get stuff done. And I do think there's a bit of a Silicon Valley bias towards tech startups as the answer. I think we, living now here in Australia, I think are innately a bit more systemic about that. And I think that's a fundamental part of what we're trying to do here. And then I think the third big shift that informed the direction was places matter. There's no point living healthy lives and low stress and sleeping and exercise and all those good things, and then you move somewhere like in Southern California. They just found that an additional 1% increase in the 2.5 micro or nanometer particle particulate pollution from the wildfires was giving a 19% increase in dementia. Similarly, a friend of mine, Ray Dorsey, a professor in the US, has just come out with the closer you live to a golf course, the more Parkinson's you're likely to get because of the assumption here, the hypothesis around the pesticides. So who knew that the longevity was so impacted by what exposome, if you like? A lot of people have been doing good work on this, but not enough. So it's that kind of holistic thinking in 5 years it's taking it to the realization that we in Australia have got the second worst record. We've got 12 and a half years of poor health at the end of our lives, second only to the States. And so that big gap, squeeze that by 5 years, and actually if that will have a very powerful impact on the economy. And so we've been seeing amazing work by Andrew Scott and David Sinclair in terms of what the economic boost would be if we could give people better lives and better healthy lives. It would be trillions of dollars in terms of benefit. But there's not enough people who think beyond the health system. And so we need to go, this is not a health system, this is about the economy, this is about politics, this is about a better vision for the whole of our country. So as you can tell, I'm passionate about this topic, and we can go on forever, but let's dive into some of the more specifics.
So you've identified a couple of things in there that are really interesting around, say, political cycles and not just waiting to the healthcare at the end. It's so what you're basically saying is, those sayings to live by. What's right? A stitch in time saves nine, if you remember that one, or if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So I guess the question is, you've got 5 pillars that you've identified that are 5 macro pillars to basically help in the Healthspan journey. Do you mind taking us through those 5 pillars and taking the people through those?
Yeah, for sure. And Mark, you're very humble. You are really the architect of much of this as well. So it was very much, again, a group effort. But what we ended up thinking through was health is one of those pillars. But the key driver here is a preventive health focus. And we've got, in some respects, a medical industrial complex, which is extremely good at delivering care. And often at times we don't need it to be delivering care because we shouldn't have the problem in the first place. And the challenge in this first bucket is, how do we shift a system, a complex that is, frankly, giving a lot of people more money, and a lot of people get paid? The more they get paid, the more people get sick, the more they get paid. This is the reality, and it's fantastic what medical science has been doing, but that doesn't mean that there's not some fundamental existential structural problems with it. And so we need to think through a preventive healthcare system. In Australia, we have even worse than the OECD average. It's something like 1.5% of health expenditure on preventive health, which is particular, and yet something like a third or 40% of the conditions that are costing people their health, costing people their lives, their emotions, their connections, and the memories, third could be avoided with lifestyle interventions. That's not me. I'm not a doctor. It's just reporting what smart doctors and smart researchers like you, Max, who have been talking about for a while. So fixing the health system, no small job, but really important. But the big part of the 5x5 is this is much broader. This is also then the food system. And Australia's got a fantastic food system. We only eat something like 20% of the amount of food that we create. It's a huge food basket, but there are structural systems. One of the issues is the nutrient density of the food has been going down. Part of the reason is because we're not optimizing and measuring nutrient density, we're measuring on weight. And we also have complicated processed foods. A lot of people are eating packaged foods and processed foods and all those things. So there's a whole bunch there. It's about the food system, and it's about the economic implications of a reimagined food system. Then we've got finance, and part of the idea here is, how do you keep people alive longer, alive in better lives, in better health as they live longer, but then they need to pay for their lives as well. So we need to reinvent the financial system. We've got a fantastic opportunity in Australia with the super fund, ahead of many other countries. One of the, I think, fourth or fifth biggest sort of pool of pensions. But so far, the super funds haven't really shown that they're leading the way when it comes to defining the vision of what the the retirement stage of life should be, because most of the super funds have come the last, only now people are starting to retire, and they've got all these super funds, and what do they do with it? How do they keep the money? And there's a huge incentive, an alignment of incentives to keep people healthy and active, and with super funds. So we're excited about imagining different financial investment products, a whole bunch of things we can go into there. And then place. I mentioned a bit earlier about place as a aspect, and we're talking about social determinants of health and how we design our cities, how we design for connection, for social isolation avoidance, how we make it easy for people to get around. These are all actual health issues. And then there's a longevity infrastructure piece that we're sort of putting across, which is sort of thinking about all the different ways in which things tie together. What are our cultural norms? What is the ageism? How do we have age-friendly employer policies, and sort of thinking broadly around the political and economic and societal ramifications of this major shift.
So,
Yeah, so
you go.
yeah, so I guess like you have talked about, the core shifts that need to happen, for this to be sustainable, because right now the system that we have is really, really not sustainable in the long term. We don't have the infrastructure, we don't have the money, and if we just keep managing decline, because that's how the medical system has been placed itself for the past 20 years, and it hasn't shifted whatsoever, where we're just, reacting to symptoms, and we're just reacting and managing decline. And that is really a ticking time bomb, and it's something that we also talked about in our previous episode, where how much can we actually save. And this is I think is a shift in mindset, but also show health funds and governments that it's not necessarily losing money, but really investing back into the economy by shifting from expensive treatments to treat disease to prevent, and have people now living longer, contributing more, and actually keeping on adding rather than taking from the government system with age. So I guess like this is a very, very inspirational, and I love to being that I'm able to be part of a change like this. But I guess my next question for you is, and you touched a little bit, I guess it comes from your background, but was there a moment that is sort of like sparked that idea, and what made you really take action and develop this whole thing and get this amazing team together? Do you want to just talk a little bit more about how this all came to take shape?
For sure, and Mark has been involved with the initial Aging 2 chapter we had here a few years ago, and so you and I have been talking about aging innovation for a while, and it's sort of been percolating since we sold Aging 2 a few years ago, and the global demand and desire has not gone away. In fact, it's even got more important for answers around this topic. And one of the moments of clarification, crystallization for me, which sort of got me there writing a little white paper, was when I was hearing the politicians jostling just before the last election, and the issues that they were talking about around health were so minute, so trivial. They were promising perhaps another $80 or so million for improving bulk billing availability, important stuff, but funneling a bit more money, and perhaps a lot more money, into a broken system was not what I want my politicians to be doing. I want them to be creating a better society for me and my kids. And as you say, Maxa, the model that we've got is broken and unsustainable. So I got a little hot under the collar, because it was also then the other, I can't remember which of the two it was, but the other person said, yes, we'll do the same, but we'll put another 10 million. It was like remarkably devoid of big ideas. And, maybe they're playing it safe because there was no real benefit for them to having big ideas. Maybe, I'm sure there are people with big ideas, but I'm not a politician, but it was struck me that the politicians need to lead here, and we need this to be a societal North Star. This needs to be something that's exciting. If I look at other countries around the world, other people are really leaning into this. Singapore is easy to dismiss because they're small and they're much more controlling, but they really invested big time into this. A lot of other countries out there vying. The UK, where I spent half my life, has been doing some really, they came out, the first country I saw, with this sort of 5 years of better Healthspan, wonderful ideas. It's certainly not novel to talk about improving 5 years of Healthspan. Doing it and delivering it, not as easy. And the moment then was around the election. And then I was looking at other places. One thing that is an inspiration was people who are thinking about fertility and improving the demographics. And I think it's not. It's a bit of a strange connection, but what Hungary has been doing with their sort of fairly right-wing government has been they're committing something like 5% of their GDP to improving the fertility and the population growth. And if you've got 2 kids, if you're a woman with 2 kids in Hungary, you don't pay income tax. And there's some significant investment. I'm not saying, what I'm saying is that there are countries that are investing and they decided to build, are we investing 1% of our GDP on improving? I think the healthy longevity piece of health span is a concept that still a lot of people don't actually know. And I think this idea of 5 by 5 was crystallizing. I want to have a conversation around health span because a lot of people think about aging as just living longer, and I don't want to live longer in ill health. And we're not the group of people around this table that are particularly talking about we want people to live forever or living longer life expectancy. We think that life should be lived healthy. The amount of lives and the years that we have should be in good health. And I think it was the health span piece that we want to make that more well known. And this spark of, okay, what do I want to do in the next 5 years? How am I going to spend my time? Was really what it sparked. It was the election. We got a new country, new sort of government here has been sort of given a real mandate. And so with any luck, I think Australia has this opportunity in the moment. And there's also a lot now happening in the market that there wasn't just a year ago in terms of longevity services. So I think the time is right for us to seize the consumer interest in the stuff and frankly, again, another right-wing reference, which you sort of made it think that I'm right-wing perspective. I don't really care left or right. I just care good ideas. The Make America Healthy Again movement is also being catalyzed. They are talking about pesticides. They're talking about big ag, big food, and there's a big groundswell of interest, of support for this, which I think is not trivial, and it's just coming in at the right time.
Yeah, it was ONU, statement, to have, decade of healthy aging. So, it's all coming together. And I think a lot of awareness is coming around this whole field. But I guess then the question here is like a lot of initiatives fall apart in these early stages. So what has helped, you really develop and solidify 5 by 5 and, make this really take shape and form and, connect this incredible team and, places and, all these connections around the globe that you have. So would you mind just sharing a little bit about...
Yeah, I think we're still very early. We haven't really even announced it. And so I think the podcast in many ways could be a bit of announcement, a bit of the context. And I think that the good thing is that we've already got many of us in the team, and there's a core team of 6 or 7 people who are all experienced, all done similar things before, and we built a network. I personally have got a fairly decent sized network in different countries and just came back from Japan. And there was so many people in Japan saying, I love what you're doing, love this interesting idea. And I was like, and it was important for me because Japan has got a real good track record and experience of managing an aging population with arguably less than half of the GDP per head spent on health compared to the US, for example, and still have universal long-term care coverage for everybody over 65 and significant generous system. But they have issues. And one of the things that I hadn't realized until I went there was that Australia was the place where they came up with this concept of no lift nursing. In nursing homes, you do not lift older people and hurt your back. And that was a sort of a policy that the Japanese came and visited. They saw that and they took that to Japan. So that's now policy in Japan, learning from Australia. And I think it's just an example of ways that we can start to seed those things. So I think we've got a bit of a starting point with this network. But I think the way that we're talking about this is not another big weighty initiative. This is, and a phrase that we quite like is a scaffolding for systems change. It is not all about us. This is about us being a catalyst and connecting other people who are doing interesting things. And frankly, we've all got other day jobs, and we need to think about how we spend time on it. But what we want to do is build the connections, and that's why I'm talking about it now as sort of operating system, a Healthspan operating system, where we can think about just making it so that people can come in, others can come in, and build a system that they can highlight what they're doing that's working. And there should be people doing amazing things in Brazil, in the UK, in Canada, and Israel that have this ability to come and share and show perspectives. And it might be that doesn't work for this population for these reasons, that reasons. But the conversations in Japan, we're saying there is a lot that they've done that could be relevant in other countries. And there's a lot that they need. For example, the digitization, the medical records, the fact that they're still using faxes, which I think a lot of health systems are. So we've got this innate need globally. We've got a network that is interested and already sort of fairly activated. There's a growing consumer interest in the topic. I think what we need now is partners who are interested in these topics to say, in these big health pillars, to say, yes, this aligns with my interest. We're not asking people for handouts. We're not asking people to do things that are a purely non-profit kind of model. We haven't really decided the economic engine. I think it's likely there's multiple different things, from very much a community non-profit kind of model to more of a fund dynamic where we can direct capital to the things that have got validated outputs. And so we want this to be as I said, a scaffolding for systems change, but not a heavy top-down blocker that needs to stand in the way of other people doing things. We want to lift up and elevate other people doing things, and that's why I think it's going to be a lot lighter weight than some other things which fall down because there's too much bureaucracy and you can't get enough funding and everybody needs to be funded in order to do anything.
So, Stephen, one of the great things you talked about is, again, coming back to those 5 pillars around Healthspan, and that was sort of health, food, place, finance, and longevity, infrastructure, and sort of technology. So you've got these 5 pillars that lead to sort of Healthspan. Something that's coming out, and then there's an operating system, a light operating system, a light touch operating system that underpins all that, so that if an insurance company believes that there's something they can do in this space around food and nutrition, that needs to tap into the food as nutrition type ecosystem. So you bring 2 partners that traditionally don't talk to each other at all under the mission of sort of a Healthspan initiative. The other thing, just on top of that, is that the wellness industry has tended to be sort of influencer-led. Let's just say they're really good at distribution, and I've got this thing that's based on this thing that you know, this exercise will do this, or this, you know, whatever will do that. One of the things I love about what Healthspan is doing is adding the scientific rigor to these things. It could be the simplest thing like walking your dog, to basically the Healthspan thing, and that it's not something that you're necessarily doing today for 50 years time. There's a benefit to you today in doing this like right now. It's not like a defrayed cost. Some of it actually is. Do you mind talking a little bit about, okay, so we've got this operating system. What do you think we can learn from those influencers that have done so well on tactical things, but now how do we bring the scientific rigor globally at scale without slowing the whole initiative down?
Yeah, thank you. I think there's a few pieces there. Let me discuss a little bit what we have in mind for what we're talking about with an operating system. And I think this is different from perhaps a convening or a set of community events, as you say. You know, there's nothing. The influence is super important. I do think that we need to influence people in the direction of Healthspan rather than the direction away from it. And I think there's the question that you raise is, how do we know what's good, what's right, what's accurate? And there's a lot of information flying around. And I think that what I'd like to see is that we build in an operating system that is self-policing in terms of the kinds of information validation that makes sense. And so the way that we're thinking about operating is sort of, funnily enough, the five components: open, So an open standards, open model where people can take. I've been inspired by GitHub. What's the Healthspan for GitHub? Could we build this model which is people going in and finding things that work and then taking them down, forking them for their local region or in their organization, fixing it, tweaking it, and then sending it back to the system. So there could be a constant learning, an emergent, a mycelial network growth of edge-based innovation informing the overall organizational sort of entity that is very porous. So that's sort of an open system. Global, the way that is, I think, necessary is to be able to have it so it's Japan.5x5.is, Australia.5x5.is, and then Kyoto.Japan.5x5. So I think the idea that we can take it down in different, and people can take it to street level, to town level, to city and regional level, and then the insights, and I was informed by some really good work that Liverpool University is doing around federation. So federation is the concept where we got local civic data cooperative in Liverpool where people share their data into Liverpool and it helps improve the overall care environment and their care services. But those insights about what's the best way to interact with certain people in certain conditions can then be shared with other parts of the UK. And ideally we can share, Ian Buchan there has talked about a mirrored sandbox idea. So we can take these ideas and test them and test different regulatory approaches in different places around the world and then and bring it all together. And the common language of what works in different places, I think, is important as well. So having a ability to all talk about the same kind of thing, which also then relates to the repositories and the validation of I did some innovation, it worked. I did some innovation and my customer also agreed it works. I did some innovation, my customer and a third-party validator said it worked. And here it is, it's all transparent and you can see it. It's one of the challenges with AI is we just don't have enough explainability. So it's sort of opening up the ability for people to dive in and look. And for those people who the data is really important to them, they should have that access. For those people who are trusted, confident, and somebody who they really like on social media, fine, but then they should be able to sort of, if they want to, they can unpack the data too. So I do think, Maxio, your work, you were the first person that we sort of interviewed for this exercise, and sort of the idea here is to build essentially expert digital twins, so we can have people like you represented digitally, and so all your work can then form this, and we can have a component of the network bringing the expertise together and starting to essentially figure out who else is doing work like this and what are the collective intelligence creating new insights that we wouldn't otherwise be able to have ourselves.
Yeah, it is very powerful, and I love this idea of the whole digital twin and being able to connect with people around the globe that are doing similar things, because I am a strong believer that together we can, achieve much more than rather, being in this competition that sometimes the own systems put you in. We often say that in academia it's like there is limited funding and there is limited things that we can do research wise, and it's almost like throwing a little piece of meat into a tank full of sharks. So it's just everybody sort of like competing, but given that here we coming in together not as necessarily competition, but opening avenues for people to work together and get funded together and potentially contribute together, it's really, really important. So I love this. So I guess I wanted to know a little bit, okay, so how can people get involved, and what is sort of like the next steps that you see happening for this initiative?
Right, so I think what you and Mark are doing is really important, which is to start to get the word out. I think a podcast is a really useful medium. I'd love to hear from people who are doing interesting things and start to have these kinds of podcasts on a regular basis. I think here in Melbourne, we're going to be having events. We meet as a core team every Thursday. We've got a meeting in a while, and I'd like to open those up to other people who want to join in. And then sort of in other places as well, we could starting to have meetups. It's still pretty much emergent. I think the logic that I've been very inspired by, a colleague of mine who's been doing some initiative called Cure DAO, building a DAO around sharing democratically, allowing people to share their insights and their data and their wearables, and this idea of very sort of Web3 DAO emergent model, I think, allows us to think through both the decentralized nature that's going to allow this thing to be robust, but also some new sort of economic agent or an economic framework that allows funding to start to flow to interesting projects. So there's a lot to be worked through. I think the other thing, so I think we would like to hear from people doing interesting things at 5x5.is. IS is a website you can submit, sign up for regular updates. From just a taking away, how do we improve our daily lives? There's, funnily enough, there's 5 things that I think would be really helpful if you just, I'm not a doctor, obviously, we talked about this before, but from all the work, there's a sort of wellness dimensions where if we look at, the social dimensions are the thing that we spend most of the time on in terms of how do you avoid getting down the road and being in a situation that it's much harder to reverse out of. And I think sugar, sleep, sweat, stress, and social, 5 ways that we can think about that. And sugar really mean in terms of the kind of healthy diet. Sleep is underrated, and a lot of people still think they can get away without it. Sweat, trying to sweat, exercise in some form every day, even those micro movements has been really effective recently. And stress, lots of research coming out about stress, both mental stress, but environmental stress, and the sort of mental health, I think, is such a big issue right now, and the social connection. And then I'll sort of throw into supplements. There's some really interesting work around the genetic components and connecting. We all may have different supplement needs. So I think a lot of people, maybe longevity folk, perhaps take a lot of them, but I think there's a handful that might be useful. And each of those, get your genetic test done and do that yourself. And then the last thing is sort of synthetics around this point about being aware of the environmental load and plastics and microplastics and toxins in your environment, whether it's your carpets or in the latest thing I saw was in glass water jars. Water bottles have some of the highest microplastics because of the plastics in the top in the lid apparently is leaching off. So thinking about your synthetic environment would be things you can do from a day-to-day, whether or not you get involved with 5x5, but we'd obviously love to have people involved in the 5x5 journey.
That's wonderful, Stephen. If this is a conversation, if anything has sparked anything inside anyone listening to this, is hit the website 5x5.is, go there, register your interest, register what you're working on. This is the first step of a journey against those 5 pillars, and we look very much forward to aggregating that information, as you say, in an operating system that's repeatable, that leverages what we know about getting movement started and happening, but then also there's a benefit to you now as well as a benefit to you in the future. So well done, Stephen, for starting the initiative with the group, and the group, and Max, you as well, for basically being part of it and adding that rigor to it.
Yeah, well done to you too.
Yeah, part of it. Thanks for being part of it, Mark. Appreciate it.
Yeah.